The grand palace of the Lycari Dominion stretched across the highest peaks of the Silver Mountains on their homeworld, reflecting light like a crystal river. Its towers spiraled toward the sky, sharp and majestic, symbolizing centuries of power. Inside the palace, the halls were lined with tapestries that moved slightly, animated with images of great Lycari warriors and rulers past. But even in such a majestic home, something heavy weighed on the heart of Queen Veilrin. Her daughter, Princess Shiluna, had not slept properly since birth. 21 of the finest doctors in the galaxy had tried to ease her suffering. They had come from every corner of space, masters of genetics, healers of minds, experts in alien biology, and yet none of them could help. Each one left exhausted, frustrated, and humiliated. Some even admitted defeat quietly to themselves, unwilling to face the Queen's cold disappointment. In the royal chambers, Shiluna cried again. Her small, wolf-like body trembled with exhaustion, yet her violet eyes remained wide, staring at the ceiling as though she could see every movement of the stars beyond. Her ears twitched constantly, reacting to every faint noise, every distant echo of palace activity. Her cries were piercing, not loud, but sharp enough to make even the seasoned servants wince. Queen Veilrin stood silently, watching her daughter, her expression a mixture of fear, sadness, and frustration. The Queen had ruled the Lycari with unmatched skill, leading them through countless wars and alliances, but she felt powerless now. No weapon could protect her child from her own sleepless mind. No law could command rest for her. Every attempt to comfort Shiluna failed. The royal cradle, the lullabies, the soothing lights, all were ignored by the child who refused sleep. The royal doctors gathered in the chamber, each offering suggestions and remedies, though many knew in their hearts that none would work. Their discussions were technical, filled with alien terms and complex calculations. "Perhaps the neural patterns are too sensitive," one said, scanning a device that measured brain waves. "We must dampen the stimuli. The child's genes are unique, unmatched by any other in our records. Suppression may harm growth. Sleep cannot be forced." Then, as the 21st doctor packed up his instruments, frustrated and defeated, a human name was brought forward. Dr. Elias Rowan, a human consultant, had been called to the palace. Humans were weak, fragile, and for centuries considered inconsequential by most alien species. They had no natural strength, no advanced genetic engineering, no psychic powers. They were often dismissed as simple, short-lived creatures, useful only for menial work. The court murmured when his name was mentioned. Some laughed quietly. How could a human, with such simple biology, solve a problem that 21 of the galaxy's greatest minds could not? The Queen's advisors questioned the wisdom of allowing him near the child. But Veilrin, desperate and exhausted, permitted it. Perhaps, she thought, even a human's simplicity was worth a chance. Elias arrived quietly, his human form standing in stark contrast to the elegant and sharp Lycari court. His clothes were simple, his eyes calm, and his movements unhurried. He carried no instruments, no devices, no chemicals. He came with only knowledge of humans, of children, of care. When he entered the chamber, Shiluna's ears twitched at the new presence. She stared at him with suspicion, eyes wide and unblinking. Elias approached slowly, speaking softly, his voice low and steady. Humans had a way of using tone to calm, and he relied on it instinctively. "May I hold her, Your Majesty?" he asked. His request shocked the room. To hold a royal predator child, an alien princess, was almost unheard of. The Lycari doctors protested. "It is dangerous. Her strength may overwhelm you," one warned. The Queen's eyes softened slightly. "She is beyond danger. You may try," Veilrin said. She placed the decision in his hands, though many in the court thought she was making a mistake. Elias knelt beside the small cradle. Shiluna growled softly, ears lowering, tail flicking. Her tiny claws flexed against the blanket, but Elias did not react with fear. He reached slowly, offering his hands not as weapons, but as comfort. He spoke quietly, softly humming a human lullaby. The melody was unfamiliar to the Lycari, yet somehow gentle, carrying warmth that no technology could replicate. For the first few minutes, the child thrashed. She kicked, whimpered, and tried to push him away. The doctors exchanged worried glances. Was this human naive? Could he truly do nothing but hold and hum? Elias adjusted his approach. He lowered himself to the child's level, matching her breathing. Humans often sync themselves with infants, allowing the small body to feel security in rhythm and touch. Slowly, deliberately, he held her closer. His warmth radiated in a way no machine could measure. Shiluna's cries faltered. Her body remained tense, but her eyes blinked more slowly. Her ears twitched less sharply. The palace fell silent. Not a single voice dared break the quiet. Even the court's attendants watched with held breath, unsure if this human could succeed where every advanced alien technique had failed. Minutes passed. Elia's continued, never forcing, never startling, only offering steady presence. Shiluna's tail stopped flicking. Her small hands relaxed slightly. The lullaby, simple and repetitive, worked not on the mind but on the instincts that had never been reached by advanced genetics or psychic methods. Then the incredible happened. The princess closed her eyes for the first time since birth. Not fully, but a long, deep blink. The court gasped quietly. Could it be? Could a human, through nothing but patience and warmth, bring peace to a royal predator? Queen Valerin felt a wave of emotion unlike any she had ever known. Tears threatened to spill as she watched her daughter, tense and restless for so long, slowly begin to find comfort. She had ruled with strength and fear, yet here she saw another form of power, gentle, quiet, human power, that could tame what she could not control. Elias continued, letting the child feel his heartbeat, feeling her small body settle in response. No monitors, no machines, no alien interventions. Just a human holding a child, showing her safety, showing her calm. The princess' small body shifted against him. Her breathing slowed, her ears relaxed. Her eyes finally closed completely and her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. For the first time in her short life, Shiluna slept. A murmur ran through the court. Some whispered disbelief. Some studied Elias carefully. Others simply stared, unsure of what they had witnessed. Queen Valerin approached slowly, kneeling beside them. Her hands hovered above the child, trembling as though afraid to touch the miracle happening before her. Elias looked up at the queen, his expression calm, almost humble. "She is not sick," he said softly. "She was overwhelmed. She needed comfort, not treatment." All the advanced knowledge of the galaxy had failed, yet here was a human, weak, small, fragile, who had succeeded with something so simple, so natural. It was not strength or technology that mattered, but presence, patience, understanding. For the first time, Valerin considered the possibilities. Perhaps humans, dismissed for centuries as inferior, had capabilities the galaxy had never appreciated. Perhaps their greatest power was in what they were assumed not to have: empathy, calm, endurance, and connection. As the princess slept, safe in human arms, the queen made a silent vow. This human who had accomplished what 21 of the finest doctors could not would be honored and protected. Not because he was strong or intelligent, but because he had succeeded where all else failed. Outside the palace, the silver mountains reflected starlight, bright and cold. Inside, however, warmth filled the chamber. A child slept. A mother's heart was eased. And a human, who had once been considered weak and insignificant, held in his hands the quiet power that would change the destiny of an empire. The night stretched on, and for the first time there was peace in the royal chamber. Shiluna dreamed softly, her small hands curled around the human's fingers. Queen Valerin sat beside them, watching, learning. She had fought wars, tamed rebellions, and commanded armies, yet the greatest lesson came not from victory but from the quiet strength of a fragile species she had once dismissed. And in that moment the court realized something profound. Humanity was not the strongest. They were not the fastest, the fiercest, or the most advanced. But they had something none of the galaxy's finest could match: the ability to make even a sleepless, desperate child feel safe and loved. It was a simple act, a small gesture, yet it carried more weight than any weapon, more influence than any empire. And in that silver palace, under the gaze of the stars, history began to take notice. The morning light poured through the high windows of the Lycari Palace, casting long silver patterns across the polished floors. The grand halls, normally alive with ceremony and the rustle of servants' robes, were quiet. Word of the human who had calmed the sleepless princess spread like wildfire through the palace corridors. Servants whispered in awe, and even the guards paused to talk in low voices about what they had witnessed. Humans, long dismissed as fragile and weak, had done what none of the greatest minds of the galaxy could. Queen Valerin moved through the hallways with her usual regal grace, her tail swaying behind her, but her mind was not on state matters. It was on her daughter. Shiluna had slept peacefully through the night, a first in her short life. The young princess, violet eyes were closed, her small body still curled in the soft blanket, and the human, Elias Rowan, sat nearby on the floor, gently humming. Valerin had observed him all night. His presence had calmed not only the child, but the palace itself. The human's simplicity was striking. No devices, no complex machinery, no alien medicine. Just a quiet, steady calm that seemed to settle the nerves of everyone in the room. Some of the senior Lycari doctors watched him with suspicion, their pride wounded by his success. Others looked thoughtful, unsure of what they were seeing. They had prepared elaborate procedures, formulas, and energy devices, and yet here a human had achieved results they could not. The queen approached Elias cautiously. "Your methods are unusual," she said, her voice soft but edged with curiosity. Her words were measured. Valerin had commanded armies, tamed rebellious planets, and negotiated with deadly species. She knew that most beings who relied on strength or intimidation would not understand her caution. Elias looked up, his brown eyes calm. "I did nothing unusual, Your Majesty. I simply held her. I let her feel safe." Perhaps the others treated her like a problem to solve, rather than a child to understand. She needed someone to listen, not someone to fix her. Patience, gentleness, and empathy were secondary traits, rarely praised, yet the human possessed them naturally as if he had been shaped for this task from birth. Shiluna stirred, her small eyes opening slowly. She blinked at Elias and gave a tiny, content sigh. The queen's heart thumped in her chest. She had seen her daughter exhausted, screaming, and restless for so long, and now she seemed peaceful. It was almost unnatural, a miracle in the eyes of the court. The human continued to hum softly, rocking the child just slightly, careful not to disturb her renewed sleep. He knew the child needed stability more than motion, warmth more than devices. His hands moved gently over her, offering comfort, not command. The palace guards, standing stiffly near the doorway, whispered to each other. "I've never seen a human like this," one said. "Could they really be this powerful?" She had heard such words before, but never in this context. She knelt beside Elias and her daughter, careful not to startle either. Her tail flicked nervously. "You may stay here," she said quietly, "and continue your care. But you must understand that the court watches every move you make. One mistake and you will be dismissed." Humans often walked paths that required patience and courage, even when others doubted them. This was a lesson he knew well. "I will do my best," he said, "but I need your permission to act naturally without interference. She cannot feel fear nor tension nor pressure, otherwise she will resist." But the alternative was clear. Continued sleepless nights, stress, and possibly permanent harm. She agreed. "You have my permission," she said. As days passed, Elias settled into a rhythm with Shiluna. He observed her carefully, noting what caused her distress and what soothed her. Lycari science focused on biological anomalies, but the human focused on emotion and perception. When the child whimpered, he whispered soft words and moved in gentle patterns. When she twitched at a distant noise, he adjusted her position, muffling the sound with blankets, always attuned to her heightened senses. The other court members began to take notice. Some whispered doubts, saying a human's methods were foolish. Others watched in awe. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Whenever Elias was present, Shiluna slept longer and deeper. When he left for brief periods, her rest became restless, her cries returning. This created tension in the court. The Lycari were proud, confident in their science and their strength. To admit that a human, so fragile, so small, was the key to a royal child's health was nearly unthinkable. Yet the evidence was undeniable. One day, a group of doctors approached the queen privately. "Your Majesty," one said, voice low, "we cannot deny the human's success, but this, reliance on a human, it may be dangerous. We are putting the child's well-being in the hands of a weak species." "That is fact. You may debate methods, but the result is real. If we continue to ignore what works, we are not protecting her, we are harming her." Elias continued his work quietly, never seeking recognition, never asking for power. He understood that influence came not from force, but from trust and consistency. Shiluna began to smile faintly, an expression few had seen. Her small, sharp teeth peeked through her lips, and her violet eyes sparkled with curiosity instead of exhaustion. The palace atmosphere began to change subtly. Guards noticed fewer disturbances. The servants spoke in softer tones. Even the queen felt lighter, her stress reduced by the child's calm. It was as if Elia's presence brought balance, a quiet strength that affected more than just the princess. But not all were pleased. Some nobles whispered about the human's growing influence. Some questioned whether it was safe to allow a being so weak, so different, so fragile to be near the future ruler of the Lycari dominion. "What if the child becomes dependent?" one whispered. "What if humans learn secrets? What if we lose control?" She had lived long enough to know that the strongest chains were those of trust and understanding, not fear. Elias had earned the child's trust, and in that trust he held the key to peace, not destruction. Weeks passed. Shiluna grew stronger, happier, and healthier. She laughed softly, a rare sound among the Lycari, startling in its lightness. She began to explore the palace under careful supervision, her curiosity no longer fueled by frustration, but by wonder. Elias followed her patiently, always nearby, always attentive. Queen Vaelrin observed all of this quietly. She realized that the human's success was not a miracle of chance, but a testament to the hidden strengths of humanity. Strengths she had dismissed for centuries: patience, empathy, calmness, and understanding. Traits that the galaxy's fiercest warriors often overlooked. One evening, as the sun set behind the Silver Mountains, the queen found herself alone with Elias and her daughter. Shiluna slept peacefully in his arms, her small body relaxed, no longer tense or fearful. The human hummed softly, rocking her slightly, his presence calm and unassuming. Vaelrin sat beside them, her thoughts deep. "You have changed my daughter's life," she said quietly. "But more than that, you have changed mine. I had thought strength was everything. I was wrong. Sometimes the gentlest strength is the most powerful of all. Humans have learned to survive by caring for one another. That care may seem small to those who rely on force, but it can move mountains." She realized that the galaxy might have underestimated humans for centuries, not because they were weak, but because their power was invisible to those who only measured strength in weapons and technology. As night fell, Shiluna slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The palace was quiet, serene. The human, weak in the eyes of many, had achieved what none before could, and the queen, watching them, understood that the future of her child, and perhaps even the Dominion, was brighter because of him. In that moment, a silent truth settled in the queen's mind. Sometimes, the most fragile beings could hold the most incredible power. And the galaxy, for all its wars, technologies, and secrets, had yet to learn what humanity was truly capable of. The court of the Lycari Dominion buzzed quietly with tension. News of the human's success with Princess Shiluna had spread beyond the palace walls. Some whispered admiration, others murmured suspicion. The idea that a weak, fragile human could calm a royal predator child was unsettling. In the Lycari way of thinking, the strongest should dominate, the cleverest should command. But here was proof that strength alone was not enough. Queen Vaelrin observed the shifting attitudes carefully. Her daughter had slept peacefully for weeks now, something none of her advisors could have imagined possible. The human, Elias Rowan, moved freely through the palace, always gentle, always calm, and always near the princess. He had no rank, no title, no weapons, and yet he wielded an influence that no soldier or scholar could match. One morning, as the pale light of Lycari dawn filled the chamber, Vaelrin gathered her council. The tension was nearly unbearable. Nobles and doctors sat stiffly, waiting for her words. "We are at a crossroads," the queen began, her voice measured. "My daughter sleeps for the first time in her life, her health is stable, and the human who has helped her continues to care for her successfully. This is undeniable." "Your Majesty," one began, "we cannot ignore that we are placing the future of the Dominion in the hands of a species weaker than any other. What if the human betrays us? What if they take advantage of the child? And trust, not fear, will shape the child better than any chain, any rule, any weapon." Shiluna laughed for the first time a few days prior, her small teeth showing in a playful grin, and the palace had never felt lighter. Guards were calmer, servants were happier, and the doctors, some of them, had begun to reconsider their skepticism. Elias moved quietly through the room, unnoticed by many but watched keenly by some. His hands were empty, yet his presence was commanding in a different way. He spoke softly when necessary, offering guidance, not commands. Shiluna had begun to respond to him not only as a child responds to care, but as a young ruler senses a guide. She would follow his suggestions, imitate his calm movements, and mimic his gentle tone. A group of junior doctors approached him privately that afternoon. "You have done what none of us could," one admitted, a flicker of humility in his eyes. "We cannot understand fully how you did it. Could you teach us? You may try to learn it, but it is not a formula you can replicate. It is about presence, about understanding what the child feels. Nothing more, nothing less." They had relied on complexity, on technology, on their own intellect, but sometimes the simplest things were the strongest. Outside the palace, news spread across the Dominion's territories. Humans, long dismissed as fragile and unimportant, were suddenly spoken of with cautious respect. Small groups of soldiers observed them in training and daily life, noting their resilience in ordinary situations. They could survive without advanced armor, without psionic shields, without enhanced strength. and yet they influenced events beyond their apparent abilities. This realization unsettled many species across the galaxy. Rumors reached distant worlds. The human had calmed a royal predator child, saved her from sleeplessness, and gained the trust of a queen renowned for her strictness and power. Other empires, who prided themselves on their strength and cunning, began to question everything they thought they knew about humanity. Inside the palace, the queen made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors. "Humans will be allowed to continue their work," she declared, "not as servants, not as tools, but as guardians. They are the soul binders of my daughter. Anyone who harms them, directly or indirectly, will answer to me." Soulbinders, a title traditionally reserved for elite Lycari aides trained in loyalty and combat, was being given to a human, a species considered fragile and inferior. Some whispered of rebellion, others of doubt, but Valerin's word was law. As the days turned into weeks, the palace slowly adapted. Shiluna's laughter grew brighter. She explored more, her curiosity no longer hindered by exhaustion or fear. Elias was always nearby, observing her reactions, teaching her subtly how to regulate her emotions and energy. He did not command, he guided. He did not control, he influenced. And the results were undeniable. One evening, a minor incident shook the court. A servant accidentally dropped a tray, sending dishes crashing to the floor. Shiluna's ears twitched, her tail flicked violently, and her small body stiffened. Instinctively, Elias moved closer, whispering her name softly, placing a steady hand on her back. The child froze, then slowly relaxed. She exhaled deeply, blinking once, twice, and then returned to play. The court watched in astonishment. A situation that would have sent Shiluna into hours of panic had been diffused in seconds. The power of human presence was evident, undeniable, and yet entirely different from the strength the Lycari valued. Some nobles began to murmur behind closed doors. "We are giving too much influence to humans," one whispered. "We cannot allow our future leaders to be shaped by creatures weaker than ourselves." She understood that strength was not always measured in claws, teeth, or psychic power. Sometimes strength was quiet, invisible, present when it mattered most. Elias continued to teach Shiluna subtle lessons. He encouraged patience, demonstrated calmness in moments of stress, and showed that even in a world filled with power and danger, safety could be found in simple presence. The princess absorbed it all, learning not through lectures or threats, but through experience. She began to mirror his calm tone, his deliberate movements, and even his gentle touch. The human's influence reached further than anyone expected. Guards noticed the princess was easier to manage, not because she obeyed commands, but because she understood the logic of calm, the pattern of presence, the subtle rules of attention. The doctors saw improvements in her health, noting that her biological stress markers had dropped significantly. The queen herself felt the effect. Her own stress eased, her focus sharpened, and her patience grew. However, not all were content. The court's unease simmered beneath polite smiles. Some whispered that dependence on a human could become a weakness, a tool for manipulation by outsiders. Others feared that if humans were allowed too close to the next generation of Lycari rulers, they could gain influence far beyond their apparent abilities. One afternoon, Queen Valerin called Elias to her private chamber. "Do you understand what you are doing?" she asked. "Do you know the effect you have on my daughter and on my court?" His words were simple yet precise. He did not seek power, he did not demand control, and he did not boast, and yet his presence was changing everything. She realized that influence did not need to be violent or loud. It could be quiet, steady, and unstoppable if used correctly. "Then continue," she said finally. "But be aware, the court watches every move you make. The galaxy may not understand what you are doing, but I do, and that is enough for now." She understood caution, patience, and empathy, lessons no Lycari teacher had been able to impart. The palace began to change in ways no one expected. Guards spoke more softly, servants moved with confidence, and even the court's elders began to accept Elia's presence. Humans were no longer dismissed as fragile. They were respected, cautiously admired, and slowly feared for the quiet power they demonstrated. A message arrived from a distant Lycari colony, confirming what the palace already suspected. When humans were present near young Lycari in other regions, similar improvements were noted. Children slept better, tantrums lessened, and minor illnesses seemed less severe. The human's influence, subtle as it was, began to ripple across the Dominion. Queen Valerin sat in her chambers one evening, watching her daughter sleep. Elias sat nearby, as always, quietly observing, ready to react if necessary. The queen's mind was filled with thoughts of the future. Perhaps humans were not just caretakers. Perhaps they were a key to something far greater. The palace was quiet. The stars shone beyond the high windows. And in that quiet, in the steady rhythm of a small human's heartbeat, the Lycari Dominion began to realize that strength alone was not enough to secure the future. Sometimes the greatest victories were won not with claws or teeth, but with patience, presence, and the courage to care when all else had failed. And the galaxy, far beyond the Silver Mountains, began to notice as well. The palace of the Lycari Dominion had grown quiet, but the silence was not peace. News of Elias Rowan's success with Princess Shiluna had spread far beyond the palace walls. Diplomats and envoys from distant systems brought reports of curious events. Lycari children, when humans were present, slept more soundly, laughed more often, and seemed calmer than ever before. The galaxy had begun to notice a species long dismissed as weak, fragile, and insignificant. Within the palace, not everyone welcomed this recognition. Certain nobles and advisors whispered with unease. To admit that a human could influence the next generation of rulers was to admit a vulnerability no one wanted to acknowledge. "We are allowing outsiders to shape the future of the Dominion," one whispered sharply to his companion. "We cannot control what humans do. They could teach, manipulate, or even spy without us knowing." And yet the child thrives, she sleeps, she smiles. The queen herself trusts him. Can we truly say it is dangerous if it works? Others saw him as a threat, a symbol of what they could not control. The queen, however, remained calm. She had witnessed firsthand the effect Elias had on her daughter. It was not coercion or manipulation. It was trust, patience, and presence. "We will not turn away what works," she said firmly during a council meeting. "This child deserves more than experiments, more than tests, more than fear. She deserves calm, she deserves care, and if that care comes from a human, so be it." The child who had once screamed endlessly was now calm, thoughtful, and lively. Elias moved through the palace with quiet authority. He did not command, nor did he demand recognition, yet his influence was evident everywhere. Guards noticed their charges were calmer. Servants worked with more confidence, and the princess responded to guidance in ways no other tutor could achieve. Children in other parts of the Dominion also showed improvement when humans were nearby, confirming the spread of what some began to call the human effect. His calmness never faltered, his presence never wavered, and Shiluna continued to thrive, untouched by their subtle attempts at intimidation. One afternoon, a minor but deliberate challenge occurred. A court official brought forward a rare, delicate artifact, claiming that Elias must transport it across the palace to the princess. Any misstep could damage the priceless item, and the official watched closely, expecting failure. Elias took the artifact carefully, his hands steady, his eyes focused. He moved slowly, deliberately, ensuring that the child was not startled. Shiluna watched him with curiosity, not fear, and when he arrived safely, her eyes sparkled with trust. The nobles were stunned. The human had succeeded where they expected failure. The incident deepened the court's unease. Some whispered about the human's growing influence. Others argued that if the child was happier, calmer, and healthier, what did it matter? Even the queen sensed the tension but remained resolute. She understood that true strength did not rely on the approval of those who measured power only by claws or teeth. In the palace gardens, Shiluna explored with Elias nearby. She chased small creatures, laughed, and examined plants with fascination. Elias guided her gently, showing her patterns, colors, and small wonders of the natural world. The princess responded eagerly, absorbing lessons not through force, but through observation and care. Her mind grew sharp, her focus steady, and her empathy for living things expanded. Observers in the palace began to notice a change beyond the princess. The staff, influenced by the human's calm presence, became more attentive, more patient, and less prone to error. Guards, once tense and suspicious, now moved with confidence and quiet efficiency. The palace itself seemed to settle into a rhythm, responding to Elias' quiet influence as much as the queen's command. However, the galaxy outside the palace began to stir. Reports of the human's success reached distant Lycari colonies and even other species. Some were curious, admiring the unique approach. Others were wary, fearing the implications. Could a weak species truly shape the minds of the strongest predators in the galaxy? Could humans, so easily dismissed for centuries, influence rulers across star systems? To test the situation, a delegation from a neighboring Lycari colony arrived, led by a skeptical advisor named Varin. He carried reports claiming that the Dominion's reliance on a human could become a strategic weakness. "We must observe this," he said, voice sharp. "We cannot allow a species so fragile to hold sway over the next generation of leaders. She is strong, healthy, and wise beyond her years. If that requires a human, then so be it." The princess listened, learned, and responded, her small mind absorbing lessons in empathy, focus, and calmness. By the time Varin reported back to his home colony, he was thoughtful. He had expected a weak human, easily dismissed, yet what he had witnessed was something entirely different. "Perhaps we have underestimated them," he admitted. "They are not strong in the ways we expected, but their strength lies elsewhere, quiet, invisible, yet undeniable." Sometimes the strongest influence was invisible, subtle, and unexpected. Shiluna continued to grow under Ilia's guidance. She developed confidence, patience, and a sense of empathy that surprised even the queen. The princess began to understand that strength did not mean dominance. It meant knowing when to act, when to listen, and when to provide comfort. She learned that a calm presence could accomplish more than force, and that influence could be wielded quietly yet powerfully. One evening, as the twin moons of the Lycari world rose above the palace towers, the queen found herself speaking with Ilias privately. "You have changed more than my daughter," she said quietly. "You have changed this palace, this court, and perhaps even the Dominion itself. But tell me, what do you seek?" "Influence comes naturally when trust is given freely, not when it is demanded." Certain nobles began to conspire, questioning whether reliance on a human could be dangerous. They argued that the child might become dependent, that humans might manipulate her, or that outsiders could gain influence over the Dominion. Their whispers reached even distant worlds, stirring unease among allies and enemies alike. The queen addressed the court directly. "The child thrives. Her mind is sharp, her heart is calm, and her body is healthy. If her guidance comes from a human, then we will accept it. Strength is not always measured in claws, weapons, or technology. Sometimes it is measured in patience, care, and presence. This is the future of the Dominion, whether you accept it or not." Others scowled, but none dared argue further. The facts were undeniable. The child thrived because of the human, and the queen's command was absolute. Shiluna continued to explore the palace under careful supervision. She learned to interact with the staff, to navigate the gardens, and to observe the natural world with curiosity. Ilias guided her subtly, teaching lessons of empathy, patience, and calm influence. She grew more confident, more thoughtful, and more aware of her surroundings. Outside the palace, news continued to spread. Distant colonies observed the effects of human presence on young Lycari, confirming what had been seen at the capital. The galaxy began to understand that humans were not weak. They were a species whose strength lay not in force, but in subtle influence, empathy, and resilience. Queen Vaelrin watched her daughter sleep peacefully one evening, Ilias nearby, ever vigilant. The palace was quiet, the court attentive, and the princess thriving. She understood now that the galaxy might never fully grasp the power of humans, but that did not matter. What mattered was that her daughter was safe, happy, and growing strong. The Wolf Queen smiled faintly. Strength was not only in dominance, power, or fear. Sometimes the greatest influence came from those who were underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. And sometimes the smallest, quietest beings could change everything. The night deepened, and the palace settled into calm. Shiluna dreamed softly, her small hands curled in comfort. Ilias remained near, a steady presence in a galaxy that was just beginning to notice the quiet power of humanity. And within the walls of the Lycari Palace, the future of the Dominion, stronger, wiser, and calmer than ever, was quietly taking shape. The morning sun glinted off the silver towers of the Lycari Palace, casting long streaks of light across the marble floors. The halls, once tense with uncertainty and whispered doubts, now carried a quiet confidence. Princess Shiluna had grown over the past months, her small body stronger, her mind sharper, and her spirit brighter. Where once she cried endlessly, she now laughed freely, her violet eyes sparkling with curiosity and wonder. Ilias Rowan, the human who had transformed her life, moved through the palace with the ease of someone who belonged, yet his presence was different from anyone else. He carried no weapons, no tools, no technology. He needed none. His strength lay in his calmness, his patience, and his ability to understand the child in a way no one else could. The court watched with awe and respect, many still struggling to reconcile the human's influence with their own pride. Some whispered that the Dominion had become reliant on him, but the Queen's confidence was unwavering. Vaelrin knew the truth. Elias had not imposed control over Sheeluna. He had guided her, nurtured her, and shown her the quiet strength of trust. In doing so, he had changed the future of the Dominion without even intending to. That morning, the Queen called a meeting with her council. "We are no longer concerned with what others think," she said firmly. "Our child thrives. The Dominion grows stronger because she is healthy, calm, and capable, and the human who has guided her will continue to do so as soulbinder, protector, and teacher. Their influence is not a threat. It is a gift." Others murmured quietly, still unsure, but none dared to challenge the Queen openly. The facts were undeniable. Sheeluna slept peacefully, played joyfully, and approached the world with a clarity and calm that none of the court had ever seen in a Lycari child. Elias knelt beside the princess, holding her small hand gently. She had grown taller, her fur slightly darker, her eyes sharper, but her trust in him remained absolute. "Today," he said softly, "we will explore the gardens and learn how every creature has its own rhythm. Watch carefully and remember that understanding is as important as strength." She ran ahead, her curiosity unbound, while Elias followed, guiding her subtly, never pushing, never forcing. She stopped to watch insects crawl along the soft grass, observed flowers turning toward the sun, and listened to the gentle wind through the trees. Every small lesson was a building block in her growing mind, and every moment reinforced the quiet confidence Elias had instilled in her. The Queen watched from the palace balcony, her expression thoughtful. She had ruled the Lycari with power and fear for years, believing that strength and command were the only means to maintain order. Yet she now understood that influence could take other forms. Calm, patience, empathy, and trust could achieve what armies, weapons, or psychic powers could not. As weeks passed, Sheeluna's abilities continued to grow. She learned to approach challenges thoughtfully, to solve problems without aggression, and to communicate effectively with those around her. The human's teachings had not only calmed her, but had given her insight into herself and the world. Where other Lycari children might act on instinct alone, she paused, observed, and chose her response carefully. This transformation did not go unnoticed. Nobles, advisors, and even rival species began to recognize the change. Reports arrived from distant colonies, confirming what the palace already knew. Lycari children who spent time near humans exhibited improved focus, calmness, and emotional resilience. What had once been dismissed as a fragile species, weakness was now recognized as a subtle, powerful influence across the Dominion. Some envoys tried to question the Queen's decision, arguing that the human might manipulate the child for personal gain. Vaelrin listened politely but remained resolute. "The child trusts him," she said, "and in that trust lies strength. We cannot measure influence solely by fear or domination. Sometimes the quietest guidance shapes the strongest leaders." Sheeluna grew taller, stronger, and wiser, her bond with Elias remaining as strong as ever. She learned not only from him but also from the world around her. She observed the palace, the staff, and the citizens of the Dominion, understanding their needs, emotions, and motivations. Every lesson Elias provided was layered with empathy, patience, and observation, giving her skills that no Lycari education alone could teach. The Queen often watched them together, her heart filled with pride. Sheeluna was no longer just her daughter. She was a young ruler in training, guided not by fear or domination, but by understanding and wisdom. Elias had taught her that strength could take many forms, and the princess embraced that lesson fully. One day, as Sheeluna and Elias walked through the palace gardens, they were joined by a group of young Lycari students. They had been brought to the princess to learn, not just about human methods, but about leadership, empathy, and calm influence. Sheeluna guided them patiently, sharing lessons she had learned from Elias. "Watch the birds," she said softly. "Notice how they work together without fighting. Each has a role and each listens. Strength comes from understanding, not dominance." The princess was thriving, and through her, the lessons of humanity were spreading across the Dominion. Not all observers were pleased. Some nobles and rival species continued to whisper doubts. "A human is shaping the future of the Dominion," one complained. "This is dangerous. We cannot control what the child learns." Sheeluna's growth and calm intelligence were undeniable. Her ability to lead, empathize, and influence was evident in every interaction, every decision, and every small moment of observation. The Dominion itself was changing. Wars were avoided, disputes settled peacefully, and the palace moved with a quiet, steady rhythm, reflecting the calm influence of both Queen Veilrin and the human who guided her daughter. Years later, the princess stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the Silver Mountains. Elias stood nearby, as he had for so many years, ever present and calm. Shiluna's violet eyes scanned the horizon, thoughtful and observant. She had grown not only in strength and knowledge, but in understanding, patience, and empathy. The lessons Elias had taught her had shaped not only her mind, but her heart. The queen joined them, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You have grown wise beyond your years," she said softly. "And you have done so because you learned more than just strategy or power. You learned understanding, patience, and care. These are the qualities that will make you a true leader of the Dominion." True strength lay in empathy, trust, and the quiet courage to care when all else had failed. Outside the palace, the galaxy had taken notice. Humans, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, were now recognized as subtle influencers capable of guiding even the fiercest species. They did not conquer or dominate. They did not wield weapons or psychic powers to command. They guided through trust, patience, and presence, shaping leaders in ways no other species could. In the palace, the lessons continued. Shiluna taught other children, guided by Elia's calm presence, spreading the wisdom she had learned across the next generation of Lycari. Wars and conflicts were reduced as understanding replaced fear, and the Dominion became a stronger, wiser, and more harmonious power in the galaxy. The humans' quiet influence had changed more than just a child. It had transformed a palace, a court, and a civilization. And in doing so, it had shown the galaxy that true strength is not always loud, violent, or obvious. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and gentle, and in that quiet power the future of entire civilizations can be shaped. On a calm evening, Shiluna slept peacefully in her chamber, Elias watching nearby, as he had done for so many nights. The queen sat beside them, her eyes reflecting both pride and understanding. Strength was not in domination alone. Influence was not in fear or force. True power lay in connection, empathy, and care. The Wolf Queen smiled faintly, her heart light. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for centuries, but she knew now that they possessed a strength no empire could match. It was invisible, subtle, yet undeniable. And in her daughter, the lessons of humans and Lycari strength had fused into something extraordinary. The palace was quiet. The stars shone above, distant but constant. The Dominion thrived, peaceful yet powerful. And humanity's quiet legacy, born from simple patience, empathy, and trust, had changed the galaxy forever. Shiluna would rule wisely. The Lycari would grow stronger. And the human who had held a sleepless child in his arms would be remembered, not for weapons or conquest, but for showing the galaxy that even the smallest, most underestimated beings could shape the course of history. In the gentle rhythm of a sleeping child, the heartbeats of a human, and the calm of a wolf queen who had learned the truth, the future had been rewritten. And it was stronger, kinder, and wiser than anyone could have imagined.